is KC Sports Network, proudly presented by Emprise Bank.
Pay heed, all who enter, and beware this podcast. This is the Pay Heed Podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer alongside Kevin Flaherty. We're brought to you by Emprise Bank, partner in all things possible. Member FDIC. And on today's episode, we're going to be talking more about KU football with our Jayhawk Rewind series as we are into week 3 of the 2023 season. As we look back, leading up to the start of the 2024 KU football season. We're 11 weeks out, I think, or 12 weeks out right now, Kevin. So we're still a ways out, but we're getting closer and closer to each week. And earlier in the week, we did also have a podcast breaking down some of the latest news from KU basketball about Marco Jackson, plus the addition of Shaquille Moore. You can find that on your KCSN feed as well if you're looking for that for offseason basketball content. But here we're going to be talking some football here today as we head into week 3. Okay, so we've done our previous 2 games. KU sitting at 2-0 as we go back in time to 2023. They take care of business against Missouri State, a fantastic win against Illinois. And now here comes lowly, bad, terrible, trash Nevada. Literally one of the worst teams in FBS as KU gets ready to play them in Reno. It's a 9:30 kick on CBS Sports Network. Nevada, by the way, they just got steamrolled by FCS Idaho 33-6 the week before. I mean, we're talking about literally one of the worst teams in FBS that KU is going to go on the road and play. After the big win against Illinois, throughout the week looking up to this game, Kevin, what was your feeling? What were your thoughts heading into this one for KU against Nevada?
It's funny because I was probably thinking Nevada is so bad that this can't be a trap game because it had all the makings of a trap game, right? You're sandwiched in between the Illinois game and your first conference game of the season. So, you're kind of in that spot. It's kind of a weird kickoff. I believe Nevada's at elevation, is it not?
Yeah. There.
You have all these different factors that, you feel like, okay, this is making to be a trap game. And then you look at, Idaho just, ran circles around Nevada. Nevada had been bad, not just this year, but for a while prior even. And so when you look at all of those things, it was kind of like, man, this could be a dangerous game, except that it's Nevada. It's probably not going to be that dangerous of a game. KU might not play well, but, they're still going to be good enough to probably win comfortably. And unfortunately, Nick, it turned out to be a trap game, and it was not at all comfortable.
Yeah, it was weird. I had a weird feeling heading into this game of the sense of, for the better part of a decade plus, Kansas had been on the other side of this conversation.
Sure.
Of they were the terrible team. They were one of the worst teams in FBS. And here comes, an average major team that's going to come in and just absolutely beat the hell out of you. Even the sports books at the time, if you were a betting individual, had Kansas favored by 4 touchdowns in this game. So, as much as you want to talk about the idea of it being a trap game, you're right. It didn't even seem like that was possible because the way KU would play against Illinois with Jalen Daniels, they were going to be missing some guys on defense. Remember, with Austin Booker being out, and also Kobe Bryant, I believe, as well for the first half at least of the game against Nevada. So there were a couple things there, but even still, it was like, hey, listen, these boys at Nevada, they just lost by 30 to an FCS school in Idaho. Kansas is coming off of a pretty significant win against Illinois at home with Jalen Daniels playing well. And to your point, even if you were to go in and play not that great, you feel like you'd still be able to steamroll Nevada.
Yeah, it's kind of funny when TCU joined the Big 12. I told our TCU guy, he was like, well, we've competed with the top teams in the country and done pretty well. I said, that's not going to be your key in the Big 12. I said, the difference is going to be, you may do okay against the Texases, Oklahomas, et cetera. The key is going to be when your team just doesn't have it one day. They're lackadaisical. They don't have it. Before in your conference, you were still good enough to win that game. Now you're doing it against, say, like an Iowa State or a K-State or somebody like that has the chance to beat you, and potentially even beat you badly when you don't have your A game. And I think this game was one of those where, with the way Kansas played, and it wound up being kind of a fluky game, and we'll talk about that. It was a game that Kansas could have won a lot easier than it did, but they were Mike Finger at the San Antonio Express News had a segment, had a saying that he would bring up all the time talking about Rick Barnes' basketball teams. You know, the Staples, like, easy button. He said they had a hard button that they would push. And, you know, Kansas football in this one definitely mashed down on the hard button and made it a lot more difficult than it needed to be, with a lot of mistakes and also with not capitalizing on Nevada's mistakes, and there were quite a few.
Yeah, and listen, I don't want to crap on Nevada too much. I mean, they are a football program that in the past had been one of the better ones in the Mountain West. You know, but I think they had a coaching change past couple of years, and you know, they'd been struggling a bit, but yeah, all in all, things were looking good. You were feeling pretty good, right? You're thinking, all right, this should be an easy route to 3-0, start the non-conference, and then we can go into conference play cooking. Before we even get into the game, though, if you remember right, Kevin, also, this game is on CBS Sports Network, like I mentioned, 9:30 Central Time kick. So you're going to have to you're going to be staying up late, get your coffee, whatever. And if you were trying to watch on CBS Sports Network, you were instead greeted by a game in which the ghost of Jacob Porchilla still somehow haunted Kansas fans. If you recall, UNLV and Vanderbilt were playing on CBS Sports Network before this game for Kansas kicked off. And it was a tie game. There was like a minute left, 45 seconds. Vanderbilt got the ball, and they're going to kick a game-winning field goal, like a 34-yard field goal, game-winning 34-yard field goal. And you're thinking, okay, thank God this game can end so we can get over to the KU game. And lo and behold, I didn't even know, here comes Jacob Porchilla to kick the game-winning field goal for Vanderbilt. And I'm thinking, oh, geez. And, of course, he misses. So now it's like, well, crap, this game's going to go overtime. You know, I'm already staying up late. This is a disaster. Well, luckily, UNLV at the time, they go down and they're able to kick a game-winning field goal, 40-37, they get the win. You're thinking, oh, thank God. Now I can finally get to the KU game. But not so fast, because you still ended up missing the first part of the game, which arguably ended up being the best part of the game for KU.
Sure, yeah. You think about the start that they had against Illinois, getting off to a hot start against Nevada, that only served to sort of nail down what we probably all thought would happen. You know, Kansas goes out, has the long drive down the field, gets a touchdown, goes up 7-0. You know, then you force a punt, and Kansas gets the ball again, and you're thinking, okay, like it's all happening, and you know that's when things kind of went sideways. You know, the second drive gets just absolutely decimated by penalties, and then they wound up punting the ball back to Nevada. It was like a 38-yard punt, I think, no return. And basically what happened was they got great field position that allowed them to go down and kick a field goal. You know, it was a field goal that was aided by the fact that, Kansas gave them an extra first down with a face mask that, basically ended a situation where it would have been a 3rd and 11. You don't know where it would have gone from there. Might have been able to still make a field goal from that range. But at the same time, all of a sudden, these mistakes start piling up kind of on both sides of the ball, Nate.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, listen, if you were like me and you were trying to watch on CBS Sports Network, you didn't get to see the touchdown drive to be in the game, which is very unfortunate. But yeah, I mean, listen, after that opening touchdown, you're thinking, okay, this is exactly how things are supposed to go. Maybe Kansas can get up by like 25 in the third quarter, and I can go to bed early at midnight instead of like 1 a.m. or whatever. I can sleep peacefully, and I won't have to be stressed out or any of that. And wrong, because after that first drive, things really started to unravel, kind of like you mentioned, with they got on the field, Jalen Daniels looks great, and then after that, Nevada really fought back. And listen, it makes sense. I mean, when you got a team kind of push back into a corner like that where they really had nothing to lose, sometimes that can kind of spark that. And that's kind of what we saw with Nevada as they started to fight back in this game. We're going to talk more about this game coming up on the other side of this break. But first, as always, I have to tell you about our friends at Home Field Apparel. You can check out Home Field Apparel for a bunch of KU gear. They've got over 40 different KU items. We got 130 other schools, including
Tulane. This is Tulane shirt with the angry green wave across it. So
yeah, there you go. So if
that one jumped out at me on the site for sure. I mean, and with me being a big fan, as a lot of people know of Willie Fritz, who's now at Houston, it made sense to get the shirt as well. So yeah, it's they've got some really cool stuff for KU. And also, if you're just looking for some good, walking around gear where people are going to be like, oh, what's that? They've got a lot of those too. I think you were saying UC Santa Barbara is coming, right? The banana
UC Santa Barbara, they've got the banana slugs. They're going to have the fighting artichokes, I think, coming up down the stretch of the summer as well. So it's a good time if you're looking for something. If you want to be like Kevin and just wear kind of a fun school with a fun logo, you can head to homefieldapparel.com. And we have you covered here at KCSN. If you use the promo code KCSN23 at checkout on your first order, you'll get 15% off. That's KCSN23 at checkout. At checkout, 15% off your first order. More KU football talk is coming up here on the Paid Podcast.
We appreciate you supporting KC Sports Network by listening to our podcast. You have helped us become the highest-ranked Chiefs podcast network in 2022 and 2023. And don't forget about our daily Substack newsletter, the best written analysis you can find on the Chiefs straight to your inbox every day. kcsn.substack.com.
This is the Paid Podcast here on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer along with Kevin Flaherty. We spent some time earlier in the week breaking down the news of Marco Jackson along with another KU basketball commit for Shaquille Moore. You can find that on your KCSN feed as well. Here we're talking about KU football as we are officially, I think, 12 weeks away. I don't know. My math, Kevin, is not great. It's either 12 or 11. Honestly, math is not my strong suit. So, we're getting closer. We're getting a little bit closer is the bottom line here. And we're continuing with our Jayhawk Rewind series, taking you through the 2023 season, figure out if we can learn some lessons from some of those games as we gear up for 2024. This is week 3. You're in Reno, Nevada. I know probably not a lot of people want to, travel back in time to think about this game, but here we are. Kansas taking on at Nevada, 9:30 Central Time kick. If you're in the Central Time, obviously if you're in the Kansas time zone or whatever. And Kansas, as we talked about right before the break there, they got off to a hot start. They got on score touchdown. You're up 7-0. You're thinking, oh, easy, cooking. Done. And then you force a punt, and you're like, okay, great, even better, right? Well, then things start to unravel a little bit for KU from there. Eventually, Nevada makes it 7-3, and I don't know. I mean, I guess this would be a good time to ask you, Kevin. I mean, at what point did you maybe start to – were you ever nervous, or did you ever have a feeling of concern at any point, really, as we started to go to this game? Because you go down 7-3, and then eventually Nevada, they take the lead, right? Or no, KU kicks a field goal to make it 10-3. So you're still up 7 at that point, but still you got a couple 3-and-outs in there. Not much has really happened. And then you have the Nevada touchdown towards the end of the first half to tie it up at 10. I mean, at what point there, at any point, did you start to feel concerned about, wait a minute, could Kansas really lose this game?
For me, it might have taken longer than other people. I mean, there's frustration, sure. And you're saying, oh my gosh, you're making mistakes. But I think it was one of those things, you go into halftime, it's 10-10, and you feel like, okay, they're going to either make the adjustments and or have the coaches peel paint off the wall, yelling at guys. You're going to come out and be a lot sharper in the second half. And the truth is, Kansas really didn't have the ball that much in the first half. I think they ran 20 plays, had 85 yards of total offense. That was actually more total offense than Nevada had. Nevada had 73 yards of total offense. And so you feel like, hey, the defense, which, again, hadn't had Kobe Bryant, hadn't had Austin Booker, it has done its job. You gave up, a scoring drive where, you gave Nevada a really short field. You gave up a scoring drive, where Nevada, traveled kind of the length of the field a little bit. And maybe you made some mistakes in there. And so when you look at it from that standpoint, 10-10 at halftime, I'm not necessarily worried. I'm thinking, okay, they're going to get this thing turned around coming out of the half. In the second half, though, as this thing started to become a little bit more of a yo-yo back and forth type of thing, and the time keeps ticking on, I think that's maybe where I was kind of like, okay, this isn't, this is a fight. You're legitimately in a scrap now, and it needs to not be, hey, I'm worried about covering the score or covering the betting line, and more about, let's get out of Reno alive. And so I think for me, it was the second half. How about you? Was there a point in there where you were kind of like, uh-oh, or here we go type of deal?
Yeah, I've talked about this a lot in the past as it pertains to KU football, right? But the thing is like, how much does it take to erase, basically 12 years of ineptitude to the point where, I mean, there's so many games that you can go back and look at where it's like the first thing goes wrong, and what happens as a fan, you're immediately thinking, oh, crap, here we go again. Oh, crap, this is, whatever. And I've always, I don't know. I mean, I'd love to hear from people in the comments or whatever, or share their thoughts on this on social media, whatever, is that at what point does that sort of dark cloud like go away? At what point does it get, at what point do you reach a sort of a level as a fan where it's, man, okay, you had one thing go wrong and it's not, oh crap, we're going to lose by 40, right? Because for so long, that's how it was with KU, where, one thing goes wrong and it's, all right, well, here's another 50-7 loss,
Sure.
That's just kind of how it would go. And so, I don't know. In this game specifically, obviously, I think there was a lot of overconfidence, including from myself, about the fact that Nevada is bad. Well, at a certain point, like you mentioned, regardless of the level of your opponent, as the game stays close and it goes deeper into the game, that starts to not really matter anymore. At that point, it just kind of becomes a fist fight, right? And who can maybe land the last punch. And so I don't know. I don't really think I was ever like really, really deeply concerned that KU was legitimately going to lose, but certainly there was a lot of frustration. And again, it almost becomes difficult to sort of look at the game and say, okay, this one bad thing happened, but it's not going to spiral, because so often we have seen it spiral. And obviously, to me, I think that's one of the best things about what Lance Leipold has brought to Kansas, is that he's brought this sense of stability of, okay, a bad play happens, and that's not going to equal 45-0 loss.
Yeah, I think there's some of that. And I think, too, people always talk, and I hate when we're talking football to flip it to the basketball side, but people always talk about coming into Allen Fieldhouse and how Kansas is so good in close games down the stretch. And they'll say things like, Kansas knew it was going to win, the other team was hoping to win. And at what point in this game, you have two programs, yes, Kansas is coming off of a bowl game, but generally speaking, a lot of these players are still players that were around when Kansas was really struggling. At what point does it become, we know we're winning this game, versus, we hope to win this game when things are not going well? And I think, with Nevada really struggling, I thought Nevada showed tremendous fight and response in this one. I think so often you look at a game like this and you say, hey, Kansas just played bad. And yes, Kansas did play badly. I'm not saying that, but you still have to capitalize on that. And I did think Nevada deserves some credit for fighting on that one. You come out in the second half, Kansas kind of drives down to the Nevada, I think 35 or so. It looks like KU's, going to put points up. Good response out of halftime. And Jalen Daniels gets hit, right before he's about to throw. The ball comes loose, Nevada recovers, and you kind of say, oh boy, like here we go again.
Yeah. I do think a lot of credit should be given to the KU defense, though, because they played really well. And I mean, Nevada ends up throwing for like 115 yards. Brendan Lewis was kind of a dual threat guy. Now, he did hurt KU pretty badly with his legs at different times throughout the game. But overall, I think the Kansas defense did about as good of a job as you could ask for given the circumstances. And we can talk more about this now if you want, but also, you think about some of the opportunities the Kansas defense had at creating turnovers that unfortunately just for one reason or another literally did not bounce their way. That's probably the biggest thing about this game that people may not remember. And if you look at the box score, it won't necessarily jump out at you, but man, there were multiple times throughout the game where Nevada had a fumble that looked like Kansas was going to be able to recover, and they did. Or, a pass that should have been intercepted and wasn't. So that was maybe the most frustrating part throughout this game, was kind of having those moments where it was like, gosh, if you just make that one play, then everything's all hunky-dory, but instead it's an absolute war instead, because it's a tight game.
Nevada had 7 turnover-worthy plays. They had 5 fumbles and 2 passes that hit DBs just straight in the hands. I'm not talking about a play where, like, a guy got a hand on it or whatever, or maybe it was, no. These are plays where it hit guys, pretty much, like the pass is being thrown to them, and they dropped it. 7 of those plays, and they committed 0 turnovers. And it was kind of funny near the end of the game. You had the fumble sort of near the out-of-bounds line. Tywan Berryhill, I think, recovers it, but it was touched by another guy who was laying out of bounds. And
I think it was
Hayden Hatcher. Sort of, oh my gosh, this at this point, what are you even going to do? But yeah, when you've got 7 turnover-worthy plays, obviously that would have changed this game significantly. Nevada wound up scoring 24 points, and some of those came on drives where they had turnover-worthy plays, so you probably allow fewer. But also, Kansas didn't really get the benefit of short fields in this one. When they scored, they had to earn it. They had to go a really long way on offense, and so when you would have given them, a few shorter fields or whatever else, maybe all of a sudden you're looking at a game that's 45-17 and nobody's worried about anything or whatever else. That really, to me, was the single biggest difference between maybe the scoreline that people felt like it should be and what the game wound up being, was just Kansas not capitalizing at all on those chances to turn Nevada over, where Nevada basically said, hey, take the ball, and Kansas is like, no, we're good.
So at this point, you go to the third quarter, it's still a 10-10 game. Kansas forces a 3 and out, and then they have a really strong drive, an 11-play, 84-yard touchdown drive, where, again, I think also this was a game where you had different moments where you thought that maybe things clicked for KU, but then they just kind of sputtered again. This was a great example of that, where you go down a long touchdown drive, you're up 17-10, you think, okay, now finally, maybe this touchdown drive will get everything rolling a little bit. We'll get things going. It's capped off by that one was capped off by a Daniel Highshaw touchdown run, which Daniel Highshaw had 1, and Devin Neal ends up with 3 in the game, by the way. For KU. And so you're up 17-10, and Nevada immediately responds. They get a big play on a deep pass from Brendan Lewis to Campbell, one of their receivers, 53 yards. And this is a play, Kevin, where I think there was Melo Dodson was called for pass interference also, but still completed for 53 yards.
And if you remember going in, one of the things that people kind of circled as an area where Kansas could maybe struggle was Nevada had good speed on the outside. And so you wondered a little bit. Obviously, Kansas kind of knew what Kobe Bryant was at that point, even though he was going to be missing time in there. Melo Dotson, you worried a little bit more because Melo hadn't emerged, as the guy that he really became over the course of the season. But yeah, I mean, Melo was there. He interfered with the guy. The guy caught it anyway for a 53-yard gain. They wind up getting a touchdown, and just like that, like you said, your hard work, it's 17-17, and you're like, well, gosh, that momentum, we just gave it away. And then, one of the better calls of the season, I think the pass to Devin Neal, who was just wide open, goes 59 yards, gets tackled at, the 1 or the half-yard line or whatever, gets in on the next play. It's 24-17 at that point, and you think, okay, things are starting to go your way again.
And then a 14-play, 7-minute drive from Nevada that ends in a touchdown. This is one of the drives that featured some of those players we mentioned about KU not being able to capitalize, where Nevada, kind of stumbled and bumbled their way down the field. They got lucky with a couple of penalties. They had a couple of plays, I think, where they had a fumble that they recovered as well on this long drive. But they do end up going down to score, and that was early in the fourth quarter that they end up scoring on this 7-play touchdown drive. They end up scoring on a 3rd and goal with a Brendan Lewis touchdown run. And so, again, a game that it felt like neither offense could really get anything going, and then all of a sudden you have 4 consecutive touchdown drives. Four consecutive touchdown drives, and you're tied up again at 24 going late into the fourth quarter.
And that drive, Nevada had a 4th and 1 where Austin Booker jumped off sides and gave them the first down, rather than them earning it. They broke like a really long run and fumbled at the end of it, only for Nevada to recover. I think it was like a 35-yard run or so.
Yep.
And again, we talked last week about Illinois' quarterback scoring twice on scramble plays where Kansas is kind of out of position. It wasn't necessarily that Kansas was as out of position, but all of a sudden Nevada has now scored 2 touchdowns on quarterback scramble plays as well. So in the last 2 weeks, you've given up 4 touchdowns just off of quarterback scrambles. And I think, I was probably a little worried before this point, but when they scored to make it 24, you're kind of like, okay, like this is a legitimate brawl. And you just said 4 consecutive touchdowns. What happened then, Nick?
Then they made it 5. They made it 5 consecutive touchdowns. Kansas again, and then again, this is really where things were a lot different for this Kansas team compared to previous Kansas teams where, Kansas would punch, Nevada would punch back, Kansas punched, Nevada punched back, and Kansas was able to get back up and respond each and every time. They come back in a tie game with about 10 minutes left in the fourth quarter, and they go on a 9-play, 75-yard touchdown drive that's capped off by a Devin Neal touchdown run. There was a big pass to Quentin Skinner on that drive.
Yep.
There was a big pass to Mason Fairchild on that drive from Jalen Daniels. And again, if you were just Bucks were watching after this game, Jalen Daniels, 21 of 27, almost 300 yards passing, but no touchdowns, no interceptions. You're like, I don't know, But he ends up still coming through and making some big plays. And that drive specifically that leads to the Devin Neal touchdown. And once again, Kansas is back in front, 31-24.
Yep, then Kansas gets a stop on the next drive, but on third down it is the fumble play that we just talked about, where Tywan Berryhill recovers a fumble. You're going to have great field position. You're pretty much already going to be you're not quite in field goal range, I would say, with Seth Keller, but you're right there. Tywan Berryhill recovers it. Unfortunately, one of the other Kansas players is laying out of bounds and touches the ball as he's recovering it. So it's overturned. Nevada punts the ball. So you lose kind of that field position. And here's one of the more fascinating parts of the game, I think. Kansas starts running out the clock, right? And it's fairly conservative. You get a bunch of run plays in a row. Well, then you get 3rd and 6, and you're in a situation where you're just outside of field goal range probably. A first down may clinch the game at this point. You have just a little bit over 2 minutes left to go. Nevada has 1 timeout to go, and Kansas ran the ball on 3rd and 6. It was an incredibly conservative play call. You hand the ball to Dylan McDuffie, who gets 1 yard. And it's an interesting thing because on one hand you say, well, gosh, Nevada is getting the ball. No, you just took their final timeout. But there's 2 minutes. That's an eternity in college football to go down the field and get the touchdown. The flip side of that decision is Nevada had not thrown the ball well. And when you look at sort of what their strength was, yes, they had speed on the outside, but other than the 1 pass play, they hadn't really been able to take advantage of it. I think outside of that, 53-yard pass play or whatever it was, their quarterback had something like 60 or 65 yards passing outside of that. And so you're making a very calculated gamble here. I think most people would have said, hey, it's 3rd and 6, get the first down. Jalen Daniels was really sharp and accurate in this game. I think he finished, 21 of 27. So
almost 3 yards,
and so to me, it makes maybe more sense to try and end the game that way. But I also understand saying, hey, we don't think they're going to be able to throw the ball well enough to go down the field and score. You get 1 yard on the 3rd and 6. Rather than trying to long field goal, you punt it. And all of a sudden, Nevada's got the ball at the 1 yard line because it gets down at the 1, which made it look like a really good decision with 2 minutes left to go. And so what did you think about that play call though? 3rd and 6, your offense has been marching up and down the field. You're coming off basically 3 consecutive touchdowns. do you go for the win there, the first down, and basically seal it there, or do you run the ball and risk whatever else?
Yeah, I think the interesting thing about this is Lance Leipold is nothing if he's not consistent. And there's been a good track record of Lance Leipold now at Kansas of generally leaning much more conservative late in games in these types of situations. You go back to, if you remember right, you go all the way back to the West Virginia game in Morgantown in 2022. Yep. Kansas had like a 4th and 2 or 4th and 3 with a chance to pretty much win the game, and they ended up punting, and West Virginia forced overtime. So there's been a pretty consistent track record of Lance Leipold generally becoming more conservative in those moments on offense, which, listen, to me, it always comes down to, and I'm going to kind of put on my Chiefs glasses here for a second. It's a Chiefs thing with Mahomes. It's like, it always comes down to if the best player on the field is your quarterback, I would generally say, hey, let your best player go try and win the game, right? Yeah. And I think in this case, it's kind of similar with Jalen Daniels, where it's like, hey, let Jalen Daniels go try to win the game, or hell, even something like that. So that was kind of where my thought process was, and it's so funny with this stuff because you can go on for hours and hours where it's like, depending on the outcome of the game, you either look smart or you look like an idiot, depending on how things play out, So I don't know. I think I probably would have erred on the side of, trying to get that first down, I think, considering the circumstances. But obviously the punt ended up working out for KU. But yeah, I'll just say this. I think Lance Leipold has shown, and whether you like it or not, whether the fans like it or not, Lance Leipold has shown that he generally is going to become much more conservative in those types of moments. I think he has a pretty consistent track record of doing that late in games now over the course of his tenure at Kansas. And it's funny because, Kansas had Andy Kolnick, who was, I think, a very aggressive offensive coordinator that would definitely go for that type of stuff. And now, he's not here anymore, right? So, maybe Jeff Grimes' philosophy aligns even more with Lance Leipold. So I would just say, I think looking forward to 2024, I don't really know that you should expect Kansas to be overly aggressive in those types of situations going forward, because we've seen now pretty consistently Lance Leipold choose the more conservative route generally in those types of situations.
Yeah, I think the thing that got me was it would be one thing if it were 4th and 1, 4th and 2, whatever. It was 3rd. It was 3rd and 6. And so to me, yeah, you try to get the first down. But, in retrospect, it wound up being a pretty good call because you only get 1 yard, you punt, but then you pin them at the 1, having to go the entire length of the field in 2 minutes when they're more of a running team than a throwing team. I think, I forget what the exact numbers were. I think that they just
yeah, they ended up rushing for 150 yards, but remember,
they ran the ball 37 times and threw it 22, and some of those throws, are coming at the end. It's interesting because Nevada winds up, getting a first down. It becomes a 4th and 1 situation. A lot of time has ticked off the clock in all of this. Nevada decides to run the ball on 4th and 1 and decides to go with an outside run rather than, between the tackles, and Kenny Logan just absolutely chops down the back for a loss, and Kansas gets out of Reno with a win. And so the decision on 3rd and 6 wound up working out. With the benefit of hindsight, it looks amazing. But at the same time, that was something that at the time, I think a lot of people were kind of like, well, gosh, why would you run up the middle on 3rd and 6? That doesn't make sense. And so it worked out like we said earlier, the game had reached a point somewhere where you said, okay, forget about everything else, just get out of here with a win. And ultimately, that was what Kansas did.
Yeah, and it seemed fitting that Kenny Logan was the guy that came and ended the game for Kansas, making that tackle on 4th down to secure
a great game.
Yeah, really great game for KU tackling-wise as well. I believe, did he set the record for most tackles by defensive back in this game against Nevada?
I don't remember, but it's interesting because last week we talked about the number of explosive plays by the defense and how they had a good day overall, but they were really explosive. They didn't get to the quarterback as much, and Nevada, to be frank, didn't, call the sort of stuff that would allow them to. But you still had 10 tackles for loss as a team. I think Kenny had 2.5 of those tackles for loss. And so you had another game where defensively you played pretty well in general, but one of the things that stood out was their ability to generate explosive defensive plays, in the backfield. And so that was definitely a positive coming out of this one.
Yeah, and now when you start to look at this game and kind of think about what lessons you could learn going into 2024, the big one is, hey, maybe don't overlook your opponents. I'm looking at you, UNLV, right? UNLV's coming in. Kansas obviously beat them pretty badly in the bowl game. That's a game where, because of this Nevada game, my ears are going to be perked up probably more for that UNLV game than they otherwise would be. But yeah, what was maybe you think about this game, looking and projecting into 2024? What are some of the other things you think you could take away from that game, looking at this season?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. And last year's KU team was pretty good. I mean, not only did they win 9 games, but they were tied or led in the fourth quarter of 3 other games. So this is a team that could have won 11 games, maybe even 12 games without a ton of imagination. They were a pretty good team. And yet, from a talent standpoint, from everything else, they pulled this one out, just barely. And so when you look at that, I think that's something to carry forward, in that, yes, Kansas has a chance to have a really successful season. That doesn't mean that you're good enough, you're talented enough, whatever, to overlook anybody. And I think that's something that you come out of this with. If you wind up having, a D game, which maybe that would be kind, calling this a D game or whatever. But if you wind up having that game against the wrong team, and really against any team, it could cost you. And so, as good as Kansas was last year, as good as they proved to be over the course of the season, they were still capable of having this kind of struggling performance if they didn't show up, if they didn't take advantage of the plays that were there, if they made mistakes the way that they made mistakes that extended drives and whatever else. And so I think, you never you hear coaches talk about burning the tape from games like this, before anybody watches it or whatever. And so I don't necessarily think it's something you're going to have everywhere, around where the football players are working out. But at the same time, I do think that it's something that maybe merits a reminder here and there of, look, we can't take anybody lightly because we just aren't good enough to do that.
Yeah, and I think Lance Leipold's message, really, since he's been at KU, has been along those lines of, hey, we got to be consistent. Right? We got to make sure that we don't get too ahead of ourselves, too full of ourselves, and still focus on getting 1% better each and every day, and each and every week, and each and every game. And another one of my takeaways from this game was, we kind of danced around a little bit, but Brendan Lewis, the quarterback from Nevada, was able to scramble for a lot of yards. And that was kind of a theme a little bit of some different games that we're going to get to later on in the year, where quarterbacks were able to scramble around against Kansas, and you wonder what kind of adjustments maybe KU might be making in 2024 to try to remedy that. But yeah, overall, I think at the end of the day, listen, you got the win, you got the W, you're moving on, you're 3-0. You're 3-0 non-conference. Doesn't matter how you got there. You're 3-0, and you're now going into conference play undefeated. So pretty cool, pretty good win. All things considered. I mean, how the game played out, right? You feel like you could have won by a lot more, but you got the win at all, period. And I think, for Kansas, getting the win, period, was obviously impossible in some cases over the previous decade plus. So, Kansas moves to 3-0 in 2023. And that's it for this edition of the Jayhawk Rewind for KU versus Nevada. Kansas at 3-0 at this point, 2023, and they'll be going into taking on BYU, right? Next game, BYU.
First conference game of the year, first conference game against BYU. So,
yep,
we'll have a lot of storylines for that one.
We'll be talking about that one next week as we keep getting it 1 week at a time, closer and closer to 2024 kickoff. KU and Lindenwood, August 29th. Of course, we'll have all that and more here throughout the offseason here on the Paid Podcast. So if you liked what you heard, or if you liked what you were watching, if you're watching on YouTube, leave us a comment, leave us a like and subscribe. If you're listening on audio, you can leave us a rating and review as well. That'll help us out so much. And be sure to stay subscribed to KCSN on YouTube, with the letter U on YouTube, and also on your podcast feeds for the latest updates all throughout the offseason here for KU football and KU basketball on the Bay Podcast. Until then, until next time, he's Kevin Flaherty. I'm Nick Springer. We'll talk to you again soon. See ya.